Oh, we're going to go till about 10:30, by the way.
Okay.
Sounds good.
Yep.
All right, everybody, we are officially live for another episode of our pre-symposium panel as we lead up to our executive symposium on August 15, 2024 in Austin, Texas. We're here to talk about how to help employees effectively balance strategic work with tactical work. So we know that when it comes to leading teams, it can be really hard to get our teams to optimally prioritize their time, optimally incentivize them to act in the ways that we want them to act in the most ideal way in the given time and scenarios that are presented their way. We're here to talk about how to go about handling that, identifying opportunities for that, and more or less be the best leader we can be for our teams. So we've got three great attendees of our executive symposium in a month here with us today to talk about this topic. We've got Neil Katz, we've got Arik Yelovitch, we've got Matt Burton. Neil, do you mind introducing yourself?
No, great. Thanks so much, Garrett. Glad to be here. Neil Katz, founder and CEO of Exceptional HR Solutions, providing fractional HR solutions to small to medium-sized companies throughout the United States.
Very nice. Arik, how about you?
Arik Yelovitch, CTO and co-founder at a new insurance startup. This is my third insurance startup in the last 8 years. So yes, I'm doing it to myself. Been in the industry for the last 20 years in tech industry, and thank you for inviting me.
Of course, of course. And Matt, how about you?
Hey, everybody. Matt Burton. I run the grid simulation business for an energy software company. So helping all the utilities and system operators plan for the future of renewable energy expansion.
Very nice. And I'm Garrett Mintz. I'm the founder of Ambition in Motion. At Ambition in Motion, our vision is a world where the vast majority of people are excited to go to work. When they are there, their expectations meet reality. When they come home, they feel fulfilled. And we believe that starts with leaders, because leaders create the experiences employees have while at work. And so we create technologies and communities to empower leaders to be their best selves for their teams. And one of the ways that we build that community is through executive symposiums, by bringing leaders together to discuss leadership challenges that we're all facing and ways that we can best lead our team forward as we identify whatever challenges come our way. So today's topic, how to effectively help our employees balance strategic work with tactical work. So Neil, Arik, Matt, one of the common things that I will see is we'll have sometimes scenarios where we'll have some employees that come to us and say, hey, I'm ready to run with the bulls. I'm ready to take it to the next level. Put me in, coach. I'm ready for some strategic thinking. And you're like, I love it. Love the enthusiasm. But this tactical work that you are currently responsible for still needs to get done. How do you go about balancing that? Or on the flip side, sometimes we get scenarios where we get some employees that say things like, hey, boss, just did what you asked me to do. What's on my docket next? And you say to yourself, I need you to think a little more strategically here, because like I can't be your bottleneck for whatever comes next. You know, we got to be able to insinuate and infer like, cool, now that I did this, I should maybe start working on this. So I'd be curious to know, Neil, Arik, and Matt, what have you found to be effective for, given the roles and responsibilities? I think let's maybe start with roles and responsibilities. How do you go about identifying, based on the role and the responsibility, giving someone the amount of autonomy to be the best they can be within those positions?
Excellent. Just jumping in.
Yeah, jump right in.
I'll just start. Yeah, I'll start rambling, and definitely curious to hear from you guys too. And you know, I'm thinking about a lot of experiences and specific, you know, people in the past when you say all that. And at least for me, what I've found, I mean, foundational to the whole thing is really understanding everybody's strengths and weaknesses. You know, and I think when you're leading an organization, typically you're at the end of the day responsible for the strategic direction of your team or that business unit or that company. But I really, really value strategic thinking from like the boots on the ground people. Maybe, you know, and I can speak from a sales context right now. Maybe they're, you know, working a little more closely with customers. They get, you know, those relationships where they hear like the real deal from them. But if we can assess their strengths and weaknesses off the bat, that's what I need to do to figure out, you know, are they more attuned towards tactical thinking? You know, are they boom, 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 one task, one action after the other, and really getting things done? And even without strategic thinking, I've seen people be very successful, even just, you know, operating in that world. But I've also worked with people who that is not their strength, and they're still very good, even in a sales context, but they're more on that kind of creative blue sky thinking, even like business development, where they're not thinking about what do I have on the truck to sell? They're thinking about how do I do something for this customer that's novel and net new and can make a big impact. But that also doesn't always drive revenue. So you need to figure out which of those, you know, it's not always just two camps, but where do they fall in that spectrum? And that kind of would lead me then into how do we either bring them more to the tactical side or encourage them to think more strategically?
So interesting, Matt, and I love your perspective. I think, Garrett, one of the things that I think we struggle with is, what does it mean to be strategic? There's so much confusion out there. People are like, oh, I want to be a strategic thinker. Okay, so what's the difference? Do we define the difference between tactical and strategic? I think that's the very first step for me. Is I can tell you the vast majority of what I see people doing is taking tactical work, experiences, and opportunities and turning them into strategic directions and values for companies. So we have a workflow that we've been doing this way for 5 years. Well, if we did this, and this, and we can do this, and we do this, we can get this outcome, and we can reduce hours by 50%. And we get, next thing you know, what you thought was a tactical employee is building a strategy for a workflow or process or a business line. I think part of it is getting people to think in a strategic mindset, but educating, what does it mean to be strategic? How do you evolve that? And I think for me, that's one of the things I've experienced so much is just asking questions of people and just continue to inquire and drive them to get them to think. And I don't use the word strategic because sometimes people think that's the boardroom or the executive team. My answer is everybody. I mean, Matt just said it. It doesn't matter. Salesperson to CEO and everybody in between has the ability to think strategically. We just got to figure out and help them on that journey and then go, that was a strategic thought. And many people will go, wow, I'd never thought of it that way. So that's kind of, I think the beginning for me is starting with the education around what's the difference and what does it look like?
Yeah, 2 great points. I think the interesting part for me as a CTO is the technology divides into two things. One is the technology aspect of, we call it strategic versus tactical, and also the business aspect. A lot of time developers know very well to develop, but they don't know exactly what the company business is or what the company, what's the strategic vision or what the vision, let's forget about strategic for a second, the strategy word. What's the vision of the company from which you build the strategy, from which you derive the tactical, right? We have to remember that these are the 3 levels: vision, strategy, and tactics. And then you have let's say the assignments, the tasks that build from bottom up, right? We never build from top to bottom because it's impossible to build a company like that in the practical, right? We build everything and then we start actually chewing into it. So in technology aspect, there are two threads there. There is the technology thread, which can be tactical, I'm doing this feature, or strategical, we need to build it in Kubernetes because we want scalability, because in a year we don't want to readdress it. So that's strategical thinking a lot of time in technology. How developers think, like, not 1 step ahead, but 5 steps ahead on a tactical mission. And on the business, how they see the business affect the technology, what are the limitations, because I can build the enterprise, but if I didn't build the launchpad to get it out of the atmosphere because I don't know the business, then it stays on the ground. So it doesn't help. They didn't help anybody to do something like that. So that's why my perspective on technology, from technology perspective, it's even more interesting because I have so many threads. These are just 2 of them that developers and the organization needs to follow through.
You bring up all really great points here. Neil, I want to dive in on this topic of big I versus little I innovation. That's kind of what you were alluding to with some of the points you were bringing up of just like anybody can be strategic, even if it's the most minute details. And I think sometimes, and I know Arik and I have talked about this in the executive mastermind group before, but this concept of like, sometimes when we think about innovation, we think, oh, it's got to be this big, crazy, hairy, audacious, we're changing the world. But I would care to argue, in my experience observing this, that the majority of the most impactful innovations that occur within a business are the little I innovations, the small, like, hey, we could slightly tweak this process right here, and that could shave off 10% of inefficiency from this, or we could do this way, and that could increase revenues like that. And those are those little innovations that I think are so big. How do we go about inspiring this? So I guess this kind of also leads into Matt's point about analyzing strengths and weaknesses. The question I'm thinking to myself is, can this strategic empowerment of work, can that be trained and taught in people?
Yes. Short answer, absolutely it can. I think it's all about the questions. I mean, I used to have an old process I did with people, and it was one of my favorite things is people come to leaders for what? Answers. And more importantly, validation. But the reality is this: last time I looked at the numbers, and please, whoever's online, don't quote me on this. This is an estimate. But last time I looked, an employee asking a leader for an answer, generally they know the answer 90% of the time already. What they're really looking for is validation and acceptance. What it tells me is ask the right questions. So I used to play somewhat of a game with my people. They'd come to me and say, I have this problem. What's my solution? I'm like, great. What do you think your solution is? Well, I don't know. Okay, if I wasn't available, what would you do? I'd go to you. Okay, I'm not available. Who do you go to? I go to your boss. And you just basically continue to put the roadblocks in front of them and say, okay, no one is available for you to speak to at this moment. Tell me what you're thinking. You must make a decision right this second. What would you do? Well, I would do 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, thanks. Have a good afternoon. They're like, what do you mean? Go do 1, 2, 3, 4. Have a good day. What it does is it empowers people to let them think. And I'm going to tell you, I would say 80, 85, even potentially 90% of the time, if you quiz and drill into what your people are thinking with their own questions, they've got the answers. And honestly, their answers are better than ours. It goes back to what Matt says. They're closest to the problem, not us. And honestly, you get close to the problem, the solution's there. You don't need strategists, consultants, or any of that. The answers are all there for you.
Yeah, I'll add to that, Neil, and that's a great point. And again, if we define the vision and the strategy and we educate, a lot of time people don't think they have the answer because they don't necessarily know the sandbox they're playing in, the business they're playing in, and they're lacking the information there. So for instance, I'm trying every time I'm doing a feature or every time I'm explaining something, I'm trying to give them the broader picture. I'm working in insurance. Insurance is a very unique domain in the US. We have great tech people, not as many tech and insurance people. So the moment I give them the broad explanation of what they need to do on an insurance perspective, things like that, they're coming up with a solution. Okay, yes, so I see, to your point, I need to do A, I need to do C, because now I understand what the landscape is. So you're right, like giving them solutions all the time, we don't necessarily even have them, right? Because we're trying to hire the smartest people. We don't try to be the smarter people in the room. So, but giving them the landscape really helps them to funnel it and understand what the solution is without, as you said, and then you add questions to that, of course, because you're going back and forth on one-on-ones and stuff like that, which improves the answers, right? Like, you brainstorm basically.
Yeah, this is fantastic. This is like, it's making me think of a couple of things. One, which is what I view as like mentorship versus coaching, where like mentoring, maybe you have past experience, you can give employees like, feedback ideas. Here's how I solved this in the past. But I like to take what you guys are talking about, which is that coaching view, where you can kind of train them into this mindset of, rather than bringing you a problem to solve, they can bring you, hey, here's 3 solutions and my prioritization of what I would put in place to fix anything specifically. And it kind of gets to this whole idea of more of like a strategic thinking framework. And this is something I'll even do like with customers directly. But, of course, when we're talking innovation, that's either something you're selling externally or you're selling it internally to somebody. And so in that context, I like to help the team, understand and train them up on a scaffolding to get there. And so kind of, Gary, your point on like big I versus little I. And I think, one thing I'll map out after doing a whole ideation session, discovery session, I won't get into all the details, but at the end, you kind of end up with like, okay, we've got 10 potential solutions to whatever the problem is. I like to map it out very literally on a feasibility versus benefit kind of chart. Because if you only focus on the big I, you're probably going to end up with a lot of high impact things you could do, but they're just not going to be very feasible. And you need to work with a wider consortium of people to understand that feasibility. So you can focus on that kind of upper right quadrant of, okay, these are the top 3 things we're going to do to solve this problem. So just giving, people on the team the ability to think through that and have that framework helps break them out of just, one foot in front of the other.
Feasibility versus benefit. I really like that. This is getting my gears going around a lot of, because like one question, Neil, you're bringing up this whole notion of like, well, what would you do if I weren't here? And then what would you do if they weren't here? It's like the question that I immediately thought of was like, what are people afraid of? And then it led me down almost a series of questions of like, well, when people ask for things like, hey, I like to take on more strategic work, it seems like almost there's this insinuation that they don't have any strategic opportunities within the work that they're currently doing. And I think what we're alluding to is that there often is, but they feel like maybe that their wings are clipped and they need the authority or the feeling of authority to go ahead and think strategically. But then, Matt, to your point about feasibility versus benefit, it drives into this notion of how do people get their wings clipped in the first place? More often than not, they don't understand that their ideas maybe were shut down because the feasibility was relatively low and the benefit was also relatively low. But they thought it was a really cool idea, and so they proposed it, and maybe they weren't thoroughly explained the why as to why that idea was not pursued. And so they think, well, this team doesn't appreciate my idea, so I'm not going to come up with any ideas. I'll just do whatever I'm told. So how do you how do you effectively counteract that? How do you, I mean, it seems like explaining the why is probably really critical within that just being able to lay out a feasibility versus benefit chart. I know I'm a visual learner. I think a lot of people are too. If you could see it literally, where you're like, hey, is it feasible? Kinda. Is it beneficial? Not really. It's really hard for us to justify moving forward on something like this.
I just want to add that to the wings clip is mistake tolerance. I think a lot of time people are afraid of making mistakes, and if the organization doesn't tolerate mistakes, and again, a mistake can be a fatal mistake to the organization that you're going out of business. I'm not talking about these ones, but the organization has to understand what the mistake tolerance is and allow people to do them. And that's an important part, like we do with kids, right? They try to stand, they fall, that's a mistake. They learn how to balance themselves. If the organization doesn't have much, then you're clipping the wings, so people would like to be more strategic. Sometimes it's an escape of I'm like to take less responsibility because I want to define the way instead of me doing something that I might fail on. Sometimes I found that that's like I would say an escape route instead of taking responsibility and build from the tactical to the strategic.
Matt, Neil, anything to add on that thought?
Oh yeah, I was just thinking about that a lot. I think that's incredibly true, especially larger, more complex organizations run into that quite a bit. But to the point, and I was thinking about this earlier too, of kind of getting your wings clipped just through like, hey, I had these great ideas and then nobody wanted to act on them. And again, this is like, it varies with size of organization and how open they are in power distance, even between management layers. But after you have kind of, here's my top 3 ideas or whatever it is, and you kind of do benefit feasibility, to get something through an organization to affect change, you need to have kind of like an executive business case drawn out. Like if you want to make some sort of fundamental change to a process or this and that, you really have to lay out all the assumptions that went into it, all of the details of, what's a potential opportunity, almost like a SWOT analysis. But you're focusing on opportunity and risk of making that change. Is there some sort of quantifiable business benefit? Like if, sometimes some organizations, if you can't draw like a line of dollars of, hey, I make this change. Okay, what's that mean? Are we going to save anybody's time? Are we going to make more money? If you can't distinctly say that, then a lot of time it's just not, you're not going to get, that quote unquote approval for it.
And Garrett, I think to add to this is, I think we talk about wings being clipped, which I think is a great thing because that's really what is stifling our innovation in our companies, big eye, small eye bow. I think what it really comes down to is part of it is setting the parameters. So somebody comes to me with a audaciously big, huge goal, and the feasibility might be low. Impact could be high, but feasibility is low because of time, development, technologies, whatever it may be. Where sometimes we stop is we're like, we can't do that. Okay. So then what I say is you take it from there and you help guide and mold it to a smaller idea of something they can do. The reality is you create a win for somebody who really gets to see something they've thought of moving forward in the journey, getting done, getting executed, getting implemented and celebrated. You got somebody on fire you can't stop in a great way. I think our job as leaders is to help design the feasibility and risk and understanding of what it means and the value and impact financially to organizations, and then work backwards and say, okay, look, that's not going to work. But, you said this. So let's take this 1/10 of that piece and talk about, I think you got some legs in this one. Let's talk about how we can take that component and let's run with that one. And it's a smaller step, but kind of what Arik said, you teach them to walk first before you teach them to run. So let's get them walking, building that kind of muscle up so that they get more understanding. Because I'm going to tell you, the more you do this, the more wins they get, the less you're going to have concerns around feasibility and impact, because they're going to understand that over time. But I think the key is no is not a no. No is, let me show you not this, but let's talk about a component of it. That's what will help us get there. You create that win and you create that with multiple people, you got a powerful team.
You know,
Yeah.
that's really, you guys are hitting on different sides of the coin. And Matt, I'm really appreciative that you're bringing the big side of the business in there, of the power of creating the business case. I think a lot of that, or really some of that bureaucracy stifles innovation, because it's like, okay, like I could attempt this new potential way of doing things, but I can't even attempt to do this new thing without creating a business case first, which is a full document, and it's a lot of effort and work. And then if I try it and it doesn't work, well, then I spent a lot of time to get very little out of it, where, it, you know, to Neil and Arik's point of, you know, maybe in smaller business, a little more startup, maybe a little more quicker to try new things, it can be easier to say, you know what, I know we are doing this process this way. I think we should try it maybe slightly different, but for this couple customers, see it, we'll try it this way, see what happens. If it doesn't work out, whatever, it's not the end of the world. The customer's not going to leave us, but at least we gave it a try. And if it does work out, amazing, holy smokes, like we discovered something new, and then we can make it part of our like innovation process moving forward. I guess maybe, Matt, this is a question for you, especially around like big business. How can we go about, actually, you know what, I think this is for every business. How do we avoid the whole culture of firefighting? How do we avoid the culture of like, keep doing it the way it's been done, don't change anything up, I'm too busy, I got all these emails to check, I got to meet with this person, got to meet with that customer, my calendar is bam, 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 I feel exhausted at the end of the day, and I have no idea what I actually did the show for it. How do we go about avoiding that? Because that, I feel like, is the biggest stifler of innovation, because everyone's so busy, no one can be like, hey, you're pedaling really, really hard, but if you gear shifted, you'd be able to go a whole lot farther, a whole lot faster with a whole lot less effort, but you've refused to listen to anybody. So you're just, you know, paddling super hard.
Yeah, there's like a few angles to this, and actually Eric's probably gonna have really good input to this. But you know, when we first met Garrett, I was doing a bunch of really cool startup stuff, and that was really fun because, you know, there you're making up the processes as you scale. And so usually it's not a decision of like, are we going to do something innovative? It's just which one of these innovative things are we going to do? And you know, sometimes in a startup environment too, I mean, everyone wants to be a unicorn and everything, but sometimes you kind of can grow too fast, especially depending on, you know, if you're a technology company, how the tech stack is built and this and that. You can run into tech debt and all these things. And so I've certainly seen those situations where great news, revenue is, you know, going up very quickly, but all of a sudden, a lot of the processes to deliver what we're trying to deliver are still a little too manual. And you end up exactly in that firefighting mode of, we need all the engineers to do effectively customer delivery where they should be building infrastructure. And so how do you manage time to break out of that? I don't know. I'm hoping Eric's probably figured that out before, but that's one angle on it. And then I think on the other side, the one other angle of innovation in a larger company is going to be really two things: just the cultural political environment. Like, you kind of need to know who the players are, who you need to engage with appropriately, but it's also inertia. There's a every big company is going to have like this is how we've always done it type of mindset. And so, you know, if you're leading a team or a business unit or whatever it is, a larger company, you need to, you know, even to Eric's point earlier, foster the, you know, it's okay to fail, you know, obviously within some framework of, you know, don't put us out of business, but certain tolerability of failure, and also just innovation encouragement. Like, don't shoot down ideas when they come, workshop them together. But anyway, those are my two thoughts on the, you know, two different types of environments.
Yeah, so to add to Matt's point here, so I found out that so in startups world, you build fast, right? Because you need to get to production, and as you mentioned, you have technical debt. Technical debt, for just understanding the term, is you building some tech stack, you build features, but you don't do it in a way. If you had a year to plan it and do it, execute it, you do it fast and furious, I would call it. And then at the end, you end up with manual, you end up with untested code, you end up with maybe slower infrastructure because you had to get to production fast. So what I found out is, when I planned with the startup that before I've been to Delos, before my current adventure, is we grew really fast. And then what I said at some point is, okay, I went to the CEO and said, okay, business aside, I'm taking now a month, and it's not always possible. So you can cut it into, so I wanted 2 months. So we decided that I'm taking a month in January last year, and I'm doing what's called technical debt month. And then I'll wait for 2 months, do business, and then take another month. And it's not necessarily possible. You can mix it, right? You can take half the team, 1% of the team, whatever. And this technical debt month didn't came from me, meaning like the ideas didn't come from me. I didn't say, hey, we have to do A, B, C. I went to the developers, speaking about trying to get them ramped up, I went to the developers and said, what's bothering you? What will prevent us from every time we release production for me to go and hide under the table, hoping everything goes well? And they started to create tickets, and we had a whole epic about it. I think in a matter of 3 days, I had 25 features there. And that's just in 3 days, because they know what they want, right? They know how to make it. All of them, it's experienced engineers. And the same thing I did with business ones. I told them, like, okay, what would make your life perfect? Of course, we're not going to make the life perfect, but and the idea is just flowing. And then you're coming back to the magic square of urgency versus necessity. And we all know this magic square.
And Garrett, I think kind of talking about the firefighting, and really what Matt and Arik both said is, I think it comes down to simply, look, we're all going to be busy. That's never going to change. Look, I've been doing this for more than 20 years, and I just always say 20 plus. We'll just leave it there. Nobody needs to know the real number. But the reality is, this is something we've been fighting with for 20 years. Not enough time, too much work. The greatest technologies in the world still haven't solved for that problem yet. And I'm not sure they will, because the more efficient we get in technology, the more work we have. It's one and of the same. The question is, as a leader, it's simply, what do you value and what do you make important? Because the reality is this: we all could choose what we want on our calendars. Yes, I know we have bosses and we have to attend their meetings. I get that. But there's a lot of other meetings you can look at and ask yourself, do I really need to be there? Or do I need to be there for the entire meeting? It's a choice we make. And I'm going to tell you, the greatest thing, the number one thing employees want today is dedicated, uninterrupted time with their boss. Caring, developmental, listening conversations. Not, okay, Garrett, here's the 3 things we need to get done. Did you get this and this and this and this update? Okay, thanks. Okay, all right, have a good afternoon. You didn't ask about my kids. You didn't ask about what I'm doing this summer, or am I taking vacation? It's a hit list. It's like rapid fire. And what I say is, budget time for your people. Make time for your people. It's hard. But I will tell you, maximize your time with your people. Give them quality, uninterrupted, dedicated, honestly, 15 minutes a week, a month. You'd be surprised what you'll get in return. That's really all they want. We all can afford, if we choose, 15 minutes a month for everybody on our team. If we choose, and all we do is put down the phone, shut the screens, and just talk, you'd be surprised the ROI, innovation, ideas. And honestly, half the firefighting probably would go away, because part of the reason we're firefighting is we're solving other people's problems.
Just on that point.
Yeah, sorry.
Oh, I was going to say, I think this is a topic for a different symposium. I have one-on-ones with everyone on my team each week. Closing, like the phone and getting the emails gone while I'm talking to them, I find that the hardest task ever. So Garrett, maybe we have a second. You find another symposium to teach me about that. But sorry, Arik, you go ahead.
No, I was exactly going the same point. One-on-one's a different topic. I think we had the symposium or something else about one-on-ones. It's a whole methodology that has its benefits. I just wanted to add a comment about Neil. Technology, I always say technology is an enabler, and it brings you to scale. Someone asked me, hey, I thought it will be less work. I told them, no, technology will create more work for you, because it just brings things in scale. I'm a cyclist, so I was very bad at going uphill. And at some point I asked my friend, when is it becoming easier to go uphill, like 3,000 feet in the Bay Area when I used to ride? You know what his answer was? Never, because you just cycle faster. And it's true. And it's the same thing with technology. You'll just cycle faster.
Arik, I'm stealing that. Arik. That is one of the best analogies I think I've ever heard. And one, I used to cycle, so I truly understand it. And it's a great way of getting people to think technology is not going to solve their problem.
Yeah.
You're welcome to use it. Just put a small C there.
Okay, I got
I
it.
also loved your example of solving technical debt, because that's something that I think is so easy, especially in a big organization. It's not as big of a deal, but especially in smaller or medium organizations, and you don't have to be a tech company to relate to this challenge of the things that you know you need to do to be better and more efficient, but you just are like, hey, we got the business. Let's just like put something out there, we'll make it happen, and then we'll iterate at some later date. But it's really hard to justify when that later date comes. And so to have almost like an internal process that's more or less saying like, okay, this is when we will reevaluate and take care of our tech debt, operational debt, whatever debt we've accumulated, because if we don't do that, we let a lot of balls fall through the cracks and we just ultimately make mistakes. But back to the whole flexibility versus benefit kind of scale here, it's so easy to say, oh, it's not really that beneficial. We don't really need to do it. It's fine. Like if we click on this button and it takes 45 seconds for the next page to load, who cares? It's 45 seconds. But 45 seconds on like computer versions is an eternity, way too long for a page to load. But it could be for any operational process. If it's like, hey, we're manually, putting through snail mail are like invoices and then waiting to get paid after a letter gets delivered to our customer versus sending them an email invoice or something that's even faster, that has like a payment link already on it. There's just so many things that we find that I find it's easy to justify to push down and push away because it's just not what's right in front of us at this juncture in time.
Yeah, I think one of the things you need to also to accommodate is the timing, right? Technical debt has to come in the right timing. You can't just justify, oh, we're in the middle of releasing a product, let's stop everything. I tend to do, and Matt, this is something that you alluded as well, I think. I tend to put the technical debt after a big release. And it's also kind of unwinds the developers like, okay, we had a big release, everybody sprinted. Okay, let's slow down, let's walk. And technical debt is kind of their thing, it's their passion as well. So they unwind, they take it easy, they're telling them like, this is a 9-to-5 job in the next 2 weeks, 3 weeks, really 9-to-5 job because we're dealing with technical debt. I'm not going to put artificial deadlines. Let's see what we can do in this month. It's up to us. Whatever we do, amazing. Whatever we don't, we'll push it to the next tech debt. And that helps to reduce the stress level. So you kind of have multiple effect there.
Yeah, and I was going to say this earlier. Like I think that's a really good analogy too for like tactical versus strategic thinking, which is the kind of typical churn and getting features out the door, customer deliverables. That's kind of the tactical side, and then solving the tech debt is that strategic side too. So one thing I think about is like that's great that you all do that on the technical side. I think about it on the sales side. The challenge we have is there's always something happening with a customer to where you kind of need to take that approach, but then like cram it all into like even a day. Like, how are you managing your day where, okay, I've got to get through the emails, we've got to do that. But then how do I have, and there's a phrasing for it called convergent versus divergent thinking, which is it's kind of just saying the same thing, but that kind of divergent thinking approach where you can sit there and, maybe not say, how do I solve this problem, but like really examine everything more holistically, kind of blue sky thinking, same thing. But how do you, and it even goes back to the whole thing, like, how do I ignore emails and stuff when they, bing, pop up and the phone's going off? Like, how do I set aside time to where I can do that divergent thinking, even throughout a day where I have, a ton of other meetings going on? So I think there's even some books about it. And, there's kind of that trivial, just, hey, block your calendar approach. But I think it just takes a lot of, blanking on the word for it, but just, you got to be really dedicated to that and make sure that's uninterrupted time.
Matt, I agree with you. I think the challenge is we got to create experiences that there's value for people to understand and happen. So here's the thing. I'm a calendar blocker. I block my calendar pretty much every day for an hour or two for business development, some other strategy work, some of that. What was interesting is that I was having a conversation, I think it was last week with somebody, and the question they asked is, when are you blocking your calendar? I'm like, well, I just look and I find a 2-hour block here, a 2-hour block there. And he's like, okay, that's great. He goes, let me ask you this question. When are you the greatest thinking? When are you energized? When are you charged? When do you really get it going? And I'm like, I'm a morning person. Like 5, 6, 7 o'clock at night, like I finish the day and I give it everything I got. And it's like the push to the end of the top of the hill that Arik was talking about, just to get to the top and be done. But my greatest thinking is 7, 8, 9, 10 o'clock in the morning. He's like, then stop. I said, stop what? He goes, block your calendar in the morning. If you're going to use that intensity of thought, find that time that aligns to you and your strategy and the way it works for you, and block that time. And he goes, look, you might not get 2, maybe you get an hour. But if you pick an hour every Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, rather than 2, and it's the time that is your passion, your time, your energy, he goes, you'll get more out of that hour than you would at 2 o'clock, 3, 4 o'clock in the afternoon. That was one that really hit me, that I was like, wow, because I was just finding 2-hour blocks and honestly wasn't very productive.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that aligns nicely with a lot of like Cal Newport's research on like deep work and deep thinking work, and like when are we the most optimally, leveraging our time, and also the power of, or rather the lack thereof, of multitasking and distractions and that sort of stuff. And it comes back to the point, Matt and Neil, you were bringing up about the power of what I just wrote was power of presence, and just being present whenever you're meeting with people. Because we're coming back to this whole notion of like, how do we effectively help team members balance strategic work with tactical work? It's really, how do we as leaders balance strategic work with tactical work? And what we often overlook, I think what we're identifying in this conversation, is that one-on-ones is strategic work, especially with our direct reports. So don't push that meeting off. Don't show up late for that meeting. Don't disregard this meeting as like a, checklist. Did you get this, and this done? But rather look at it as an opportunity to engage with the team member on something that they're driving towards, or that they're being roadblocked by, and let them brainstorm with you to maybe identify solutions, because that is strategic thinking work, because they're in the weeds doing the work itself. You're not. You're leading it. You're above, 10,000 foot view. And so if we're not taking the time to consider that as strategic time, then we're probably making a big mistake.
Yeah, part of how you avoid emails and stuff like that. So when we worked in person, when I went to the Bay Area, a lot of one-on-ones I took walking down to a local coffee shop in Palo Alto or Mountain View. So you don't have your computer, and you're not gonna look at your phone when you're speaking with someone. Sometimes when Texas weather allows it, like I'm not gonna do it mid-August in 12 p.m., but I actually take my phone headphones so and they can still see me, or we decide we're going no video, but we both outside somewhere and we're able to communicate better. So that's one of the ways I'm avoiding distraction, because they happen all the time. Like especially when you work from home. Another way, by the way, I found that for people sometimes doing something else, like in the mornings when you run, when you walk, when you cycle, whatever you do, this is where your thought process, like you really think about stuff. Unfortunately, you can't write them all the time. So I really like the opportunity to work with people from different time zones. I think this is a great advantage we have post-COVID. If something good came out of COVID, it's the virtual world, and to be able to hire people from different time zones. So when I work with California, most of the time I had the mornings. So I didn't even have to block my calendar, right, Neil? Like if you work with every time zone, you're basically, you need to do that. But maybe also if you have people from California, dedicate the morning to your thought process, and at the evening available for them, and etc.
Very nice, guys. This has been a really interesting pre-symposium panel. I've really enjoyed this conversation. We've covered a lot of really great components to how to effectively lead teams and just help them balance strategic work with tactical work. So if you're watching this and you're thinking to yourself, man, I'd love to meet with these 3 great leaders, come to our Executive Symposium on August 15th in Austin, Texas from 5 to 8 p.m. We'll be talking about how to help employees effectively balance strategic work with tactical work. We'd love to see you all there. I'll post the link in the chat in terms of how to RSVP. But guys, thanks for your time today. Thanks for being here. And everybody watching this, I hope to see y'all in a month. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.